Hello, everyone, and welcome to our final session of Summit. Thank you for joining us in Track 2, Architecting Your Disease Community. This is sponsored by Mallinckrodt Pharmaceuticals. My name is Emily Kelly, and I will be your host for the last breakout session of the day. As a reminder, this track is being live streamed, so welcome to all of our remote attendees. And just a reminder to everyone to download the mobile app and use some of the highlighted features like the live Q&A. This last breakout session will be presented by Alan Gilstrap, Executive Director of Advocacy and Policy at Akcea, Sandra Revill Tremulis, Founder and President of the Lipoprotein Foundation, Jenna Swan, Manager of Patient Advocacy with Retrophin, and Chelsey Fix, Associate Director of Industry and Government Relations with NephCure Kidney International. Today, they'll be discussing the importance of working with industry and how to identify key strategies in developing these relationships. During this session, patient advocacy in and out of industry, what you need to know about working together. Let's welcome them up.
It helps if you turn it on. Dave Cabanera asked me yesterday, he's like, Alan, is that really you? Because it doesn't look like you. I said, well, my requirement for a photographer is they have to immediately take off 10 years from my life before my picture is finished. So thank you all for staying and coming. It's great to see all of you here. A couple of years ago, I was involved with a working group that put together some guidelines that could be used in the relationships that we have with each other. Just curious, how many here in the room represent a patient organization? Excellent. And then how many represent industry? Okay, awesome. It's good to have you. So there are a couple of resources that you can use to inform your relationship. One of those is a European guideline, and the one that came out last year that there was a working group that Susan Stein led is there as well, you can see. And it's in OrphanNet Journal. It's open resource, I believe, so you can go out and get it. There's 4 pillars that are mentioned in that publication in terms of guiding the relationship. And the 4 pillars are, and I'm going to read them just because I want to make sure I get the wording correctly, but it's the identification and engagement with companies. Number 2 is patient engagement and patient privacy. Number 3 is financial contributions. And number 4 is clinical trial communication and support. So today, we thought we would talk about our relationships with each other here on the stage and how that relates to these 4 pillars. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jenna and Chelsey, and they're going to talk about a couple of those pillars.
Thank you. Thank you, Alan. We're actually going to move over here because I'm so short, so I think it helps if I stand. So my name is Chelsey Fix. I represent NephCure Kidney International. We are a nonprofit organization dedicated to serving a community of people living with a rare form of chronic kidney disease called primary nephrotic syndrome. And under that primary nephrotic syndrome umbrella, there are some other specific indications. So what you're seeing here on this first slide actually is our newly revised mission statement. Still private, don't share it. I'm just kidding. So what's really great about this being our new mission statement is that it is really action-oriented and I think really descriptive about how we are now working with the patient community within the current landscape. So Alan mentioned the 4 pillars, and really what Jenna and I are going to touch upon is how we work together in terms of clinical trial communications. So our mission is to accelerate research. This really clarifies that we're not a nonprofit that does research or funds research anymore, but it really solidifies our place within the patient community. So my job at NephCure in particular is to facilitate people living with these diseases to have their voices heard at the table as industry and pharma and Retrophin are designing clinical trials and thinking about coming into this disease space. We've always been the center of the wheel for all of the relevant stakeholders, but putting the patient community first has always been at the heart of our mission. And knowing that our patient community, there are no FDA-approved treatments for most of the indications under that nephrotic syndrome umbrella. So knowing that the best way to serve the patient community and what they wanted more than anything was a therapy that would make their lives better. So that has always been our primary purpose. But I just want to give a quick history about how we got to that new mission statement and where we are today. So between 2000 and before 2018, maybe 2015, we invested about $15 million in basic and translational research. And I only mention this because this is really how those first druggable target pathways and the infrastructure for the long-term observational studies were started. Before 2000, when we were founded by 4 patient families who plugged in on their their kitchen walls to the internet, before that, there was no organization dedicated solely to this patient community. So they came together and with some expert guidance were advised to start a foundation to fund research. So that's what they did for the first 15 years. After that, when the long-term observational studies collected enough data to understand the natural history and that basic research had some druggable targets, we started to see industry come in, largely because of an evolution in surrogate endpoints that was eventually accepted by the FDA. Aside from all of that, we have absolutely remained the hub for people living with this disease, providing education, support, regional communities. In full disclosure, I'm not a patient or patient parent myself, but we have a patient parent on staff who guides everything that we do. Our board is mostly made up of patients and parents, and we have volunteer committees ready to go, ready and willing to go for all of these activities that we facilitate. Go to the next slide.
All right, thank you, Chelsey. So I am Jenna Swan. I am Senior Manager of Patient Advocacy at Retrophin. We are thankful to be working with NephCure and to have them speaking with us today, and also grateful to Global Genes for the opportunity to speak. So as Alan mentioned at the start of the session, we are referring to some guidelines that have core pillars that he listed, and that Chelsey and I are going to be speaking to patient engagement and clinical trials and how we work together. But first, I wanted to just tell you a little bit about who we are at Retrophin. So our mission is to identify, develop, and deliver life-changing therapies to people living with rare disease. We are a commercial stage biotech company with a robust pipeline, and Chelsey and I work together through sparsentan, which we have a clinical trial in phase 3 enrolling for focal segmental glomerulosclerosis, FSGS, and then we have a phase 3 trial that will be starting in Q4 of this year, so soon, for IgA nephropathy. We are more than 180 team members worldwide, and we're located just down the street in San Diego, so we're in our home state. So what are some of the best practices that we've come up with as a company for working with our patient partners? Well, I think that we recognize that through our advocacy department, we are the stewards of our patient advocacy relationships throughout the company, but that doesn't mean that other groups cross-functionally do not touch our patient advocacy partnerships. And so with NephCure, it's different for every partnership that we have, but with NephCure, they also collaborate with our clinical operations team and other different groups within the company. So we believe in early engagement and transparency to ensure that there is that strategic alignment in our plans. You heard in NephCure and Chelsey's opening that their mission is to bring new therapies to nephrotic syndrome patients, and that also is clearly a mission of Retrophin to bring new therapies to rare disease patients. So some of how that collaboration with clinical operations and with patient advocacy looks for clinical trials is that Chelsey and her team will review some of the protocols as well as patient-facing materials And we were laughing actually about one example in particular where we brought what we thought was a really great patient-facing material to Chelsey and her team, and it was this large kidney, and there was a circular shape beneath it. And one of her team members noticed, it kind of looks like a huge bean on a plate. That's really just not going to resonate with our patients. And so we said, all right. So we laughed and we moved on. Also noteworthy is that Retrophin has a grant committee that's comprised of key stakeholders within our company to ensure that this graphic that you see on the screen is coming to life. And so you'll see on the outside all of our strategic priorities as a company, and then at the center are our patients. And so we want to make sure that every business decision that we are making as a company is with our patients in mind first and foremost. But I do have to note that working in advocacy, there are some things that really we bring through just for our patients, because part of our job as advocacy within industry is making sure that we understand our patient's full journey 360 approach. So therapeutic need is only one of those needs in the community. So sometimes when people ask me what I do as a patient advocate in industry, my first response is that I listen. Proper points of engagement with patients, caregivers, and their communities are imperative to us doing the best job that we can to serve our patient communities. And that helps us to figure out better outcomes together. So some ways that we've partnered with NephCure to make sure that we are getting this voice of the patient into Retrophin is focus groups that they've led through some of their NephCure leadership summits that they've so graciously let us take part in. Patient meetups at community events that are regional across the entire United States, as well as bringing patients in for speaker bureau programs at our offices. And Chelsey will show you an example later, but we had NephCure in for Rare Disease Day this past year, and repeatedly we hear from our employees that this connection point is so impactful, and it makes what they do every day so worthwhile, knowing a face of a patient that they can associate their position with. So I just wanted to also give Chelsey an opportunity to speak to what those types of opportunities for their patient organization and for patients speaking at those types of functions means.
Yeah, I think for the people living with FSGS in this case, are the ones that we brought to Retrophin for Rare Disease Day and for some of these other events, the feedback that we get is that this is the first time that they actually feel heard by any sort of medical professional. So a lot of patients go into this feeling intimidated, so that's why we make sure that NephCure staff goes with them, and we stay the whole time. We help facilitate questions, but really our job there is to make sure that the patient voice is heard loud and clear, and then our patient community comes out of that just feeling absolutely amazing, feeling like this is the first time that they were heard, within their disease journey. So we have about 5 minutes.
So last, I just wanted to underline that, it's a continuous learning process for us in industry, and that we do want to hear from you as patient advocates. So always feel encouraged to share your story and share your experience.
So taking what we learned from those in-person meetups that we do with our industry partners, we realized that there are some recurring questions and some confusion maybe around clinical trials. So in response to that, we realized that the best way to serve the patient community while also being a good industry partner was to launch patient-friendly education material. So we created a full library of clinical trial FAQs, debunking research myths, all of this vetted by a patient panel that we work with very closely, and then as needed, we bring in our industry partners for some fact-checking or final eyes. This is some examples of how we talk about clinical trials taken right from our Facebook page. So that first one there with the kidneys in the hands, that is the phase 3 trials logo, duplex. So this post was written at NephCure, vetted by our patient community, shared with our industry partner, and is one of our most popular posts on that Facebook right now. It really just shows in how we're trying to raise excitement about this opportunity and clearly communicate that this is a huge, huge opportunity for a new drug to become available for people living with this disease. The other post, was an example of one of the just general education materials. We were getting a question a lot of interventional versus observational. This was the first time a lot of these patients in the community had really been critically thinking about a clinical trial. So by kind of lifting the veil behind it and in clear terms explaining what was involved, we were able to raise excitement and raise education so that everybody was on the same page. These last two, right from our Facebook again, is just an example of how we do our best to show each other love. So again, the patient community was a little bit wary when clinical trials started coming through and they were seeing that they were being run by big drug companies, and that was a little intimidating at first. So we do our best to show that we're all friends, this is okay. Retrophin is a wonderful company, and we're just very transparent that we have this relationship with them. And I think by bringing patients there, they get to see that and spread that message. We're all working together for the same goal, and there's no harm in just being very transparent about it. The last thing I do want to mention is we're constantly, as Jenna said, constantly evolving as to how to be a good industry partner, realizing that clinical trial recruitment in this area is difficult. We're doing our best to be the best partner, and we're launching what we're calling the Gateway Initiative. As you see through that graphic, we're bringing all stakeholders together who might have found each other with or without us, but the benefit of NephCure doing this and being at the center is that patients have a very prominent place at the table through all clinical trial recruitment strategies. So the 4 pillars of our Gateway Initiative, on the next, thanks, is a patient-facing tool, which is what we're calling a patient-friendly clinicaltrials.gov, hopefully matching a patient with the trial that best suits them. Driving collaboration, so finding the barriers that are impeding or slowing clinical trial recruitment and working with experts, working within the patient community to address those barriers. Expanding our community, so our name is NephCure Kidney International, but admittedly we've been more US focused, so we're really putting an effort into being more international. And then finally, for the first time in our 18-year history, we're putting up a public list of doctors that are quote-unquote experts at treating this disease, getting our patients to better care earlier and hopefully connecting them with a clinical trial. So with that, Jenna, you want to give us a summary?
Sure. Just to summarize, transparency with one another and to identify shared goals and objectives that informs their best partnership strategy. Early collaboration breeds trust. And evolution of partnership has led to elevated standards of collaboration and creating more impactful initiatives. And also just wanted to add, share your story and share your voice. That's another takeaway that we want you to get from this. So thank you.
And you have the clicker? Are you going to stand up or sit here? Oh, we're going to stand up. Okay. We're going to stand up. I might walk around. This is just odd. Okay. So I'm Alan Gilstrap with Akcea Therapeutics. And Akcea was founded in very late 2014 as a very small startup company. Paulo Soteropoulos was a former colleague of mine at Genzyme who founded Akcea. And I came to Akcea because Paula is one of the most patient-centered leaders that I've known and have worked with. And it's interesting, the name Akcea came, it's a Greek word, and Paula came across this word as she was tasked to build this company, but also in the process of translating a letter that she was writing to her mother-in-law and translating it into Greek. And she came across this word Akcea, which translates to something that's rare. And because it's rare, it's very precious. And immediately Paula said, that's the name of my new company, because our patients are rare and therefore they're very precious. And so we try to treat our relationships that way. But this article came into my email box one morning, and it came from a compliance consultant that we work with. And I don't know if any of you saw this Washington Post article, but it shine some light on the financial relationships that industry partners have with some of the patient groups they work with. And the question in the headline is there a payoff? And you know, as I started talking to Maureen about some different topics that we might talk about this year, I said, Maureen, this topic I think can never have enough conversation around it. And you know, anything about money is very sensitive to me because it's a place that we potentially can be perceived as not being the most transparent. And so my philosophy is that we always be transparent in our relationship, particularly around money. And Akcea's commitment to patients is that we're a patient-centered company driven from the top down. Our partnerships are based on shared interest, mutual respect, and transparency. And we highly value and promote the independence and sustainability of the patient organizations that we work with. And certainly, finance is a part of that. And just a side note, you'll note that the young man in this photograph is here sitting on the second row over here with his hand over his face. This is just my own personal slide that I put together for myself several years ago in my working with different rare disease patient groups. You know, a reminder to myself that all of my partnerships and all of my efforts to work with the patient groups that I work with is always to move them to the leading side of this graph. Patient organizations leading the conversation around their disease and becoming more and more professional and sustainable as they move in that direction. So, you know, when I think about transparent relationship and providing metrics back to understand how the resources have been used, the first patient group leader that I think of is Sandra Tremulis. And this is an email that I received, and it wasn't just me, but my CEO and my boss, and we receive emails like this from Sandra. And this was at the beginning of this year, and it was a little bit of Sandra's summary and her metrics of how she measured her success last year. Mind you, Sandra has really led this very small organization by herself, her and her husband. There are more patients coming into the organization now, but most of the work has been done by Sandra and her husband. And Sandra is just very good at reporting back, listen, this is how our resources together have been used to raise awareness, to help other patients understand about their disease, to help physicians understand about Lp(a) and its impact on the population, and how to help patients get access and knowledge about how they can get their Lp(a) tested. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sandra and allow her to tell you her story.
Thanks, Alan. Yes, we are a small organization, and I hope that this inspires some of the smaller organizations out there as far as how you can make an impact. I tip my hat to each and every one of you that is a CEO to a non-profit corporation out there. And I have a question for you. How do you guys, and you can just call it out, show your impact to your stakeholders, to donors, to partners? What type of metrics do you use? What do you give them? Anybody? Number of brochures handed out, number of events you went to, dollars donated to research, grants funded. Great. Well, the Lipoprotein Delay Foundation, in a very simplified, oversimplified form, we're an inherited cholesterol disorder, which is actually a lipoprotein disorder. The lipoproteins carry the cholesterol to different parts of your body. And the disorder we have is inherited. And myth busted, diet and exercise have no impact. You know, what we've been told is that if you have elevated cholesterol, that there is a reason, something you did to yourself that means that you have heart disease. Well, I thought I was extremely rare when I almost died of a heart attack when I was 39, but I was an athlete. And there were no risk factors. So my doctor ran a blood test and came back, I had high lipoprotein (A). And that was over a decade ago. And I lived my life in fear, waiting for the other shoe to drop, thinking I was one of 12 people out there in the world. I then subsequently, without any data, went on to have my daughter. And I went to see a lipidologist, and he said to me, well, Sandra, you have a malignant family history. There is no treatment for what you have. It's prohibitively expensive to do research. And oh, by the way, the kid you risk your life having has a 50% chance of having this. So I went home, put my head in my hands and said, well, if this is me and 12 others, I still need to get the answers for Ali. Well, I put a plan together. Now, some of you may call it a business plan. Others of you may call it a marketing plan. It doesn't matter what kind of plan it is. I just put down in writing everything that I knew. And after talking to doctors and patients and everybody I could, I realized, based on all the data we had, and a lot of it is new genetic data, as you know, we're part of a brave new world, it turned out that 20% of the global population has high lipoprotein (a). We're actually not a rare disease, but I started out thinking I was that way. And I think a lot of you are seeing the evolution with genetic data, that you're growing, right? You're realizing there are more of you out there than you thought. So the foundation started out of that plan. There's the plan kind of overview. We had a vision to live in a world where lipoprotein (A) was routinely diagnosed, treated, and family screened. That was the vision that came out of the plan. The mission, well, it seemed like nobody knew about this. How could this be? This is 20% of the global population and nobody knows about it. So we wanted to reveal this inherited lipoprotein, or as commonly called cholesterol risk, for premature cardiovascular disease and death. And we wanted to educate and empower patients and save lives. And our goal was to save lives by increasing awareness, advocating for routine testing, for it to be part of your standard cholesterol test, and a specific treatment for high lipoprotein (A) because it's genetic. We put together a list of objectives. After listening to everybody, we listened for the problems, and then we looked at the problems and we said, okay, where in the process, where in the system is this broken that it ends up becoming a problem? So we backed out of that and ended up with a list of objectives. These were our objectives. And then we went about achieving those objectives. Now, I don't know about you, but in my life, nobody's ever given me any money where I haven't had to say where it went, how I used it, and how I was going to improve upon what I did with it next time. That was just from my working career. So I went into the nonprofit world with the assumption that if anybody, a donor, a stakeholder, a partner, gave me funding, I needed to be able to tell them exactly where it went, how it was used, what I learned from it, and how I was going to improve what I was doing next time. And so we went about these objectives, a strategic research proposal that took a lot of patience and 3 years of advocating with the NIH, including, we've talked about guidelines, right? And we talked about that in an earlier session, and I learned a lot today, actually. A standardized blood test included as part of the standard lipid panel, early detection, accurate diagnosis and a treatment, a reimbursable ICD-10 code, which took 3 years of advocating with the CDC. If anybody wants to talk to me about that process, I'm certainly welcome to. We wanted to generate awareness, and obviously we want to support our patients. We got lucky. It's a terrible thing. Bob Harper had a terrible heart attack in New York, and he died and they brought him back. And he went on the television, and we were in the New York Times with him, and he talked about the fact that his mother died young, and he had no other risk markers. His only risk marker was high lipoprotein, little a. And how could this fit, healthy, strong, super athletic person almost die of a heart attack? Well, he has this inherited lipoprotein disorder. So when we think about the programs that are going to roll up under our objectives, we're always thinking about, how are we going to measure what we're doing? And how are we going to share that data with our stakeholders? And every program, I think about, okay, how am I going to measure it, and who are we going to tell? And then what are we going to do with that data? How are we going to learn from it? Okay, so we went to a trade show. We met with 50 physicians. We have an objective for an event based on how many people are there, how many people are in attendance, how many people we're going to talk to. And we count how many brochures we hand out, and we look at the return on investment of being at that event. And then we figure out, okay, both tangible and intangible results. Maybe you also spoke to somebody in industry or a doctor, and that relationship is worth way more money than, getting 3 more doctors added to your database. But you need to look at that in total, both tangible and intangible results. And then when you come to present that information to your board or to your stakeholders, you know exactly why you went and what you got out of it and what you're going to do better next time. One of the aspects of generating awareness, we have a lot of wonderful consultants that work with me that donate as much time as they do charge for it. We put out a press release that was in association with getting to the ICD-10 codes. And every time, again, I was like, okay, how are we going to measure this? So we chose Business Wire, and we're not funded by them. This isn't an endorsement. There are a lot of, obviously, companies you can use to put out a press release, but they do a great job of giving you metrics back. So I wanted to use a platform that I would be able to report on the results of and look at the return on investment. I can say to the board, okay, we spent $1,500 on this press release, but this was the reach, and here's the highlights, and this is where it was picked up. So it has a tangible result. And the same thing with partners. Why is it important? Because transparency with one another and identifying shared goals and objectives helps to inform your strategy with the partners that you work with the donors you work with, all of the stakeholders. And when you can report on the impact that you're having, they become even more confident about giving you more donations, giving you more gifts, giving you more support, because you can show them how you're making an impact. And we're only small. There's me and basically a bunch of consultants, and we're all volunteers except for the consultants. But we've been able to have a lot of impact because we've been able to report on what impact we're having. And, we have a big task that we're undertaking, but you can be little and mighty if you can measure things.
So you can imagine. So you can imagine that when I send my grant to the LPA Foundation, I know that every dollar of that grant is going to be squeezed and used, and none of it will be used as payback to me or Akcea or, the relationship is transparent, and there will be no perceptions by anybody that it was not. So, yeah, and I'm going to take questions.
One of the things as well with regard to contractual agreements with partners is one of the things very early on with my organization is that we actually enlisted a pro bono attorney. And all the contracts we have with our partners, it clearly states that there is no conflict of interest there. So having an attorney that can help you in putting together that mutual letter of understanding in the beginning is a very good asset. And if you can find a pro bono one and also a CPA and some of those powerful resources that you need to run a corporation, if you can have those volunteer with you in the beginning and when you're smaller, and then maybe as you grow, they can become, paid help. But in the beginning, you need that volunteer support, but it's very powerful support.
All right, how about if we take some questions? We have about 12 minutes. Any questions? Now, a room this big, you're getting shy, aren't you?
Well, we do have one question from the live Q&A. First, I'd like to ask everyone to give a big round of applause to all of our speakers for their talk. So while you all think of your questions, I'll get started. The question is takeaways. What are things that the people in this room, patients, advocates, and industry need to know about working together?
Oh, goody, I get to start first. I would say, if you're a patient advocate that is not yet connected with a company that may be working on something for you, I would encourage you to reach out. We always are so excited to hear from patients and from advocacy communities. And you can ask to speak to whoever might be in their patient advocacy function. So that's my tip starting there.
I would add communication is key, transparency is essential, and to always keep the people living with this disease at the center of what you're doing.
I think my one's pretty obvious. Have a plan, work the plan, measure it, and be able to prove the impact you're having.
And I would say always seek for transparency and sustainability.
Thank you. I have another question back here.
It's me, Dave Caponero, and I want to know where you got your picture taken. No. What I want to know is, with all that's going on, you showed the article from the Washington Post. How can industry and the patient organizations work together? Because we're finding out that there are other groups who are interested in what we're doing, but don't really understand what it is we're doing in regards to the support that companies, industry do give to the patient organizations, but also the resources that the patient organizations need in regards to so that they can grow, they can help educate and all that. Any thoughts from the panel on that?
I would say share your stories like we're doing right here. But it's up to all of us to communicate to the stakeholders around us about our relationship and how, alone we can't do this. Industry alone can't do what we need to do. Patient organizations alone can't do what you need to do to get treatments for your members. So we need each other. And so how do we do that in the most transparent way?
You another question here at the front.
Hi, I just wanted to ask too, for patient advocates who are just starting out, just even knowing who to communicate within a company or which companies would be more inclined to our specific method of treatment. If we have a treatment that's helped us that we know and we have studies on based on different clinical trials that are just kind of in the new beginnings, how do we put that forward to these companies that we feel will help us the most, I guess, to achieve where we want to go when we know that there are roadblocks with, it might not be like a monetary valuable thing for them to commit to us, or they may not see the reasons why, or that it's a small group of people. How do we as patient advocates put that message forward, and to whom can we make the most impact for? And I guess is it best for me to maybe go to the company headquarters and request a meeting with the CEO to be like, this is my story, this is what I'm going through? Who can you direct me within your company that might want to make a difference and want to move forward for a treatment that, say, that company already makes for us as our life-saving medication, that they would maybe fund clinical trials or treatments? How do we make that? Is that the best way to go about it? Because I want to do the right thing and not burn bridges or be pushy, but also to make an impact so that they see kind of where we're coming from and that they could make a huge difference in our lives.
I think that one of the things for me when you approach any potential partner, and I'm not just talking about industry, a commercial interest like we had, Triumph Motorcycles, because of a relationship my husband and I had, donated a motorcycle to us. You have to look for the mutual benefit. In any relationship, even if it's a hospital institution or, you have to do a little bit of homework, sit down with a piece of paper and think about, well, what value can I bring to them? And, what value can they bring to me? And then when you present to them, you've really got an idea of presenting to them, what the value is of partnering with your organization. And it can be from a variety of different areas. Even if you're going to approach somebody to get printing donated, what value can I offer you? Can I put your logo on my website in return for you donating your printing services for a period of time? Because they get exposure in the community and maybe in your local community. Maybe you do a local art and wine festival and you have a booth there and they donate something and you have their logo on your information at your booth as donating within the local community. So, look for the value, that's a win-win for both of you and then build your conversation around that.
I think the only thing I would add is that there's definitely strength in numbers when approaching like this. So don't feel like you have to take it on by yourself. I think that if you reach out and ask within your community, you would find a lot of people willing to help share their story and brainstorm to find that value add.
And I think from an industry perspective, what we would be interested in is your understanding of your community. How many, who, quality of life issues that they deal with on a regular basis, and any data points that we could look at to see if we could address those issues.
I think that's one of the things when I started the organization that I realized is when you put together a business plan and you look at what is the value that you as a patient community bring to the table? And it's your specific knowledge of the disease state. And you are the only people that are in tune with that information. So the value you bring to the table, and if you build a way to gather that information through your patient registry, through patient forums, the voice of the patient, that all has value. And, right from the beginning, that was, what I knew we brought to the table, and I crafted the way that the organization evolved. We're very small, but our whole organization has a membership software, a CRM system software behind it. So from day one, we were building our community. And it's not just the patient community, it's also your physician community, your thought leaders, other stakeholders that are in your circle. It's bringing all of those people together and getting them to communicate with one another. We have 30 doctors on our scientific advisory board. That was so that we could get a conversation going in a lot of different areas, and they all volunteer, but they can't all volunteer all the time. So at any one time, there may be 2 or 3 of them that can give me some time. So that's why there's so many of them.
I was just also going to add that strategic alliance management is an emerging piece of industry, and you're working with researchers, advocacy organizations, and industry to create partnerships. And so looking at companies that maybe have those types of models in place as well.
Thank you. Thank you. It was great. Going back to the tips, can I add an extra one? Don't talk to the patient. Talk with the patient. There's a big difference there.
We have another question from the live Q&A from the mobile app that goes along with that. For patient groups, what are some examples of things to avoid in a relationship?
I'll start. I think the one thing that we want to avoid is, I think, an industry partner that wants too much control or too much access. So I think we do have to make sure that we draw boundaries to make sure that materials that we put out from our foundation still have NephCure's voice, have NephCure's images, branding, and are not too controlled by our industry partner. And again, that goes back to talking with the patient. Our patients helped us craft all of our messaging, and we don't want it any other way. We don't want anybody else encroaching on that. So I think that would be my number one.
Well, I would suggest that you're the Swiss. And you're there, you represent the patients, you serve the patients, and you serve their needs. And the relationships you have with partners are there for a particular program, a particular objective. But the vision and the mission and the objectives are of the patient organization. And then you look for opportunities where there's a potential partnership where it marries up. But you know, you're the patient organization, and the governing board are the ones that make the decisions about what happens with the organization.
I was going to say that you should make sure that you're not pushing your objectives too hard as an industry partner. Make sure that you are meeting your patient organization that you're working with where they are at, and that these are mutual beneficial partnerships. So,
yeah, I think the only thing I would add to in speaking to a patient organization, avoid any situation where you don't have the ability to say no. You never want to be in that relationship.
My follow-up question is a little bit more tactically. So the partnership is critical, but how do you avoid the implicit or the feeling that the patient organization is now endorsing the pharma company? That's where we kind of get challenged, in that we want to make sure that they feel that neutrality and feel that we're the Swiss. So any ideas you have there would be helpful.
We're in a situation where we have a potential approval date tomorrow. And we're very clear that patient groups are not there to advocate for the price of whatever the price is of our treatment. The patient group is there to, if they're called by media, they're there to talk about, isn't this great? There's a therapy now for this condition that before had no therapy. This disease is incredibly debilitating, whatever the disease burden is. And then to just focus on the fact, again, that there is now an option where before there wasn't. And then let the company defend its own. So therefore, you're creating, you're never selling the company, you're never selling the cost of the drug. You're only talking about your situation. Does that make sense? Do you agree, board?
yeah, I completely agree. Just education and awareness on all opportunities that are available to your community.
I would make sure that the way that you talk about the partnership comes from your own words, so that it's not, a bunch of legal jargon. But if you do want some legal jargon, you can think about disclaimers on your website or on your social media pages that kind of reflect that there is a relationship there. But most importantly, I think anything that you put out needs to come from your own voice as an organization.
Okay, another one from the live Q&A. Do you think the relationship between patient organization and industry company changes or should change after the drug comes to market?
I think it's very current. That's a very current question. I think from my own perspective, I think it pivots just a little bit. Because in the clinical development process, the relationship is more about industry seeking information, talking with patients to understand their burden of disease. And I think after approval, after there's a product on the market, it pivots slightly to, how can we do better? How can we improve our relationship in this new place that we have, where we are, and how can we improve our service to the patients that we are trying to serve?
I completely agree with Alan, and then I would add that one thing that remains consistent is that we're always looking for opportunities to improve quality of life, and that is, outside of just therapeutic intervention. And so as an industry partner, really understanding patient experience is a constant thing. It doesn't stop at any stage.
I think as a patient organization, again, it goes back to mutual values, and irrespective of whether the drug is approved or not, does it fit into your objectives and what your patient community needs? And you look for the mutual opportunities irrespective of whether there's a drug or not. And if there's a good match and the program fits, then that's a good relationship.
I agree. I think the relationship can change, but it doesn't have to go away. At least for our patient community, one drug being on the market isn't going to suddenly make their lives perfect. So there are still going to be opportunities to partner on education, awareness, or more clinical trial initiatives. So it's critical to survey the landscape and really think critically about what the patient community needs to improve their lives, within 5 years, and then look in 10 years and 20 and so on and so forth. So also sustainability, as you mentioned.
All right, I don't see any other hands, but we have one more question from the live stream. So to give advice to a young nonprofit when asking corporations, individuals, or an industry for sponsorship, aka money, how much is too much?
Who wants to start?
We'll start with that answer.
You can always ask, okay?
I agree. Think critically about what you need and what will actually make your programs that you're asking for thrive, and start there. You can always ask.
I would say also, as you ask, transparency about the budget that you need to achieve the objective that you're asking for the funds to achieve, and then also transparency on who else you are asking for funds from, if there are other industry partners that you're approaching.
I think one of the other things is whatever program you're putting on, whether you're producing a piece of literature or you want to do a video, is to go and get a few pricing quotes, or if you want to put on a gala, put a plan together and put all the pricing and all of the information on there, because realistically, you have to know how much you need to do this program, and then you look for partners that can help you with, part of it. And it can be a partner from lots of different areas. So you have to have a realistic understanding of how much it's going to cost you to do this for your patient community, and then back out of that number and then look for opportunities to partner to be able to cover the costs.
Okay, thank you so much to Jenna, Chelsey, Sandra, and Alan for an excellent talk and Q&A. Just a reminder to please jump on the mobile app and fill out the quick survey. And the last talk is in the grand ballroom.